Hello, Miss Foltz. Again, here we're going to be talking about Chapter 4, Section 4 on climate change and global warming. So, as we get started, the main thing we're going to be looking at here to begin with is what are some of the characteristics of global warming? Global warming and climate change can be used kind of interchangeably. So, what are we talking about when we're talking about global warming? Well, we're talking about an overall increase in temperature. So we're talking about average temperatures in areas increasing. So an increase in temperature. Now, this does not mean we can't have cold temperatures. This doesn't mean there can't be blizzards. It just means in general, average climate for places is going to be increasing. What else do we see? We see an increase in storm activity, hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts, other things like that. So you see an overall increase in natural disasters because what's happening is that global warming increases the amount of heat or energy on Earth. And we'll talk about how that happens in just a little bit. And another thing that you kind of have happening is you kind of have a change in temperatures that causes plants and animals to have to move. So you see an increase in diseases. You see an increase in extinction events that are happening as animals have to move where they live. Okay, so these kind of things are all a result of global warming. Okay, so let's talk about the natural process that kind of is at the forefront of what's happening here. So generally speaking, Earth has a little bit of an atmosphere around it. And that atmosphere is made up of things like CO2 and methane, gas, water vapor, and those gases are just outside of Earth here. And they serve a really important role. So basically, when sunlight comes in, so let me just draw ourselves a little sun up here. When sunlight comes in, it's going to come in, it's going to hit Earth, and some of it gets absorbed, but some of it comes out and hits those greenhouse gases and gets reflected back to Earth. Okay. Sometimes those gases will come in and it'll hit Earth and it just goes back out into space. So you can have light get absorbed, light get reflected back, or you can have light just leave. Okay. And so it's really important. If we didn't have this greenhouse layer, Earth would be so cold we couldn't actually live on it. So the greenhouse effect and greenhouse gases are very important. So what's the problem then with things like CO2 and methane building up if they're a good thing? Well, the problem is that as they build up, this layer of gases gets thicker and thicker and thicker. And so what we end up happening is instead of some of the light being held inside and some of the light being let out, ends up happening is more and more of that light is getting reflected back to Earth. So as it comes in, it's reflected back. Earth as a whole then starts to heat up. And as Earth gets hotter, you get those effects that you see on the right. The temperature right here, that's happening. The natural disasters increase. The diseases and extinction starts to increase. Okay, because as animals and plants move, people move, we go into areas that we're not used to those diseases and that causes problems. So there's a lot of results that are happening because of global warming. Okay. Now, other things to look at is a lot of times when you're looking at global warming, what you'll see is a graph that kind of shows you how things like carbon dioxide change over time. And so that graph, if you've ever seen it, just basically plots over time what the greenhouse gases. And you'll notice when you look at those graphs, a lot of times what you'll see is that although the greenhouse gases are going up, they have some variation. So a lot of times it kind of looks a little something like this. And so the overall trend here is upward, but there is variation. And why that is happening is because when you look at Earth, most of the landmass, if I was going to draw a line where the equator is, so the equator's, somewhere in here. Okay, most of the land you can see is up in the northern hemisphere. There's very little land in the hemisphere. And so because of that, you have these increases and decreases in time. So over here, you have an increase and then a decrease. And that happens because the northern hemisphere has most of the plants. So in the spring, it takes CO2 in. In the fall, it releases CO2. And so because of that, you get these seasonal things, but we can still see it's moving upward. Okay, look in your book, go through the chapter. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to join my Zoom meeting that happens every